My name is Elaine Foster, and the night I caught my husband taking another woman to the movies, I didn't scream, I didn't throw a drink in his face, and I didn't storm out. I sat right behind them, ordered the biggest tub of buttery popcorn the theater sold, and crunched every single bite so loudly he couldn't pretend not to hear me. Each crackle of the kernels between my teeth was a war drum, each swallow a reminder that his secret wasn't so secret anymore. But that moment, me in the darkness crunching while his shoulders stiffened and his mistress leaned in closer, didn't come out of nowhere. It was the end of a long, slow, unraveling one that began in a quiet, suburban home where appearances mattered more than truth. Richard and I had been married for 19 years. We had the house with the white shutters, a neat yard edged with rose bushes I fussed over every spring, and the framed family portraits lined up along the staircase wall. To anyone driving past, we looked like the picture of stability, and for a long time I believed we were. I was 45, a high school English teacher in Denver, proud of my students and my work. Richard, a financial advisor, had built a reputation for being steady, trustworthy, the kind of man neighbors waved to on Saturday mornings when he polished the car in the driveway. But marriage, I've learned, has cracks that only the two people inside can see. Richard's cracks began small: a missed dinner here, a late night there, explanations delivered with that easy charm of his. Client emergency, he'd say, or just one more meeting. And I, tired from grading papers and managing our household, would nod, kiss his cheek, and tell myself not to nag. The thing about trust is it doesn't break with one lie. It erodes slowly like a shoreline eaten away by the tide. I noticed his phone glued to his hand more often, the way he tilted the screen when I walked into the room. I noticed the way he lingered in the garage before coming inside, finishing calls in hushed tones. Yet every Sunday he still sat beside me in church, his hand resting warm and heavy over mine, as if nothing had changed. For months I lived in that fog, half aware, half asleep. You learn to make excuses for someone you love. You teach yourself to swallow doubts, because the alternative feels like swallowing glass. It was a Saturday afternoon when the first undeniable clue surfaced. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I felt something stiff in the pocket of Richard's jacket. I slipped my hand inside and pulled out a small, glossy stub. AMC Theaters. 2 seats. Friday night, 7:15 p.m. I frowned. Friday night, Richard had told me he was working late with a client who owned a construction company. I stared at the stub until my vision blurred. A movie ticket. 2 seats. It was so ordinary it hurt more than if I'd found a lipstick stain on his shirt. Cheating wasn't just expensive restaurants or hotel rooms, it was date night at the movies, giggling in the dark like teenagers. I placed the ticket on the dresser, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to breathe through the pounding in my chest. Images rushed in: Richard leaning close to some woman sharing popcorn, whispering during previews. I felt sick. When he came home later carrying takeout as if everything were normal, I tucked the stub into my jeans pocket and smiled like nothing was wrong. I listened to him talk about a long day at the office while we ate sesame chicken in front of the TV. He never noticed that I barely touched my food. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his even breathing. I wanted to shake him awake, to hold the ticket stub in front of his face and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly collecting doubts, knew the truth already. And I realized if I confronted him too soon, he would just lie smoother, cover his tracks better. So instead, I chose silence. In the days that followed, I began to notice patterns. He had a late gym night every Thursday. He stayed late at work nearly every Friday. When I checked the movie listings online, the times lined up perfectly with his absences. Each realization was a cut across my skin, but it also sharpened something inside me. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I wasn't going to crumble. No, if Richard wanted a secret life, then I would let him walk right into his own trap. The opportunity came faster than I expected. One Thursday morning, he kissed my cheek on his way out the door and said, "Don't wait up tonight. I'll be at the gym late, training for that 5K. The words hung in the air after he left. Richard hadn't run more than a block in years. I walked to the kitchen window watching his car pull away, and I felt the decision click into place like a lock turning. If he was going to the movies again, so was I. I would sit in that theater, see the truth with my own eyes, and choose the moment to let him know he hadn't fooled me. I didn't know yet how I'd reveal myself, but deep down I wanted to hit him where it hurt most. His arrogance, his belief that I'd never catch on. And when the idea came to me to sit right behind him, loud, undeniable, impossible to ignore, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: control. The ticket stub burned a hole in my mind for days. It sat folded inside the nightstand drawer, tucked under a stack of old birthday cards. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that my suspicions weren't just the byproduct of an overworked imagination. Every time I touched it, the jagged edges pricked at me like a splinter under the skin. The first morning after finding it, I watched Richard butter his toast in the kitchen, humming off key, as if the world hadn't just shifted. I studied his face the way you study a stranger's, the little lines around his eyes, the way his hair had gone silver at the temples, the calm confidence in his gestures. How could someone so familiar suddenly feel like a stranger? "Big day," I asked, pouring myself coffee. "Same as always," he said, flipping through the newspaper. "Meeting with the Peterson account at noon. Might run late tonight. Don't wait up." I nodded, careful to keep my voice steady. If he noticed the stiffness in my smile, he didn't show it. That night, I sat alone on the couch, the TV murmuring in the background. At 7:10 p.m., I pictured him slipping into the theater, hand brushing against someone else's. I pictured them laughing, sharing popcorn, whispering in the dark. My stomach turned. I realized something then: betrayal isn't just about what they do. It's about the way they steal ordinary moments from you. Friday night movies had once been ours. We'd gone almost every week when we were first married, buying one large popcorn and arguing playfully over which candy to share. Somewhere along the years, life had gotten busier and the tradition faded. But to know he'd revived it with someone else that cut deeper than any lie he could tell. Over the next week, I began noticing more signs. A faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine on his shirt collar. Receipts for gas stations across town nowhere near his office. And always the same line: "Don't wait up." I kept a notebook tucked inside my purse, and each time something seemed off, I wrote it down. Thursday, 8. Ire 0 p.m. Gym bag in trunk, but shoes spotless. Friday, 7. 15 p.m. returns home past 11, shirt too crisp for a workout. Saturday morning, smiles while checking phone, erases notifications when I walk in. Every entry tightened the knot in my chest, but it also made me calmer. This wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. And then the confirmation. I was grading essays at my desk when Richard's phone lit up across the room. He was in the shower water, running steady. My eyes fell on the screen before I could look away. Fandango. Your tickets are confirmed for Thursday, 7th, 30 p.m. Enjoy the show. I stared until the glow faded. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone, turned it over, and set it back down. His passcode was still our wedding date. I could have opened it, read every detail, seen the name. But I didn't. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront him with words he could twist. I wasn't going to argue while he stood there, eyes wide, voice smooth, swearing it was all a misunderstanding. No. This time I would confront him with silence, with presence, with a truth he couldn't escape. The day of the show, I made my plan. I checked the theater's website, found the 7:30 listings, and chose the same film he had tickets for. My hands shook as I clicked purchase, but I forced myself through the checkout screen. One ticket. Row G. I spent the afternoon pacing the living room. My heart pounded every time I looked at the clock. The rational part of me screamed that I was about to humiliate myself. What if I was wrong? What if it really was just a client meeting? What if the seat beside him stayed empty? But the other part of me, the part that had seen the stub, smelled the perfume, read the ticket confirmation, knew better. By 6 o'clock, Richard was standing in the doorway, gym bag slung casually over his shoulder. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing my cheek. "Might hit the steam room after cardio." "Of course," I murmured, smiling. "Have fun." As his car pulled out of the driveway, I felt my throat tighten. But beneath the hurt was something sharper. Determination. I arrived at the theater half an hour early. The lobby was alive with chatter, the buttery scent of popcorn clinging to the air. Families clustered around candy displays, teenagers giggled in groups, and couples held hands as they scanned their tickets. I stood among them alone, my coat wrapped tight around me. When the usher scanned my ticket and pointed me down the aisle, I walked slowly, my palms damp. Row G. My seat was waiting. I sat down, the velvet scratching against the back of my legs. The previews hadn't started yet. I kept my eyes fixed on the aisle, every muscle taut. Minutes stretched like hours. And then I saw him. Richard. My husband. He walked in, laughing softly, his hand pressed to the small of a woman's back. She was younger, mid-30s, maybe her hair long and loose, her dress casual, but just a touch too polished for movie night. They whispered to each other as they moved down the road directly in front of me. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. My hands gripped the armrests until my knuckles turned white. When they sat down, Richard draped his arm casually across the back of her seat. She leaned in close, her head nearly touching his shoulder. They shared a tub of popcorn, giggling when their fingers brushed. He didn't look around. He didn't sense me behind him. And in that moment, watching them settle in as if they belonged there, I knew tonight I wasn't the one caught in the dark. He was. The theater was dim, filled with that hushed buzz of anticipation that always comes right before the previews. I sat rigid in my seat, a row behind Richard, and the woman who had quietly stolen my husband's attention, if not his love. My pulse pounded so hard in my ears that it drowned out the chatter around me. It's strange the way betrayal sharpens your senses. Every detail felt amplified, the faint citrus perfume drifting back from her hair, the warmth of the soda cup sweating against my palm, the buttery salt clinging to my fingertips. I'd been here countless times before, back when Richard and I still had date nights. But never like this. Never watching my marriage unravel under the flicker of silver light. I adjusted my coat collar and sank a little lower in my chair. From here, I could see Richard's profile, familiar yet foreign. The way he leaned toward her, smiling with a softness I hadn't seen in years, made my stomach twist. He had once reserved that smile for me back when we were young and giddy, whispering inside movie theaters and laughing at jokes only we understood. Now the same gestures played out in front of me, recycled for someone else. I thought about leaving. Truly I did. I could have slipped out quietly, spared myself the agony of watching them. But another part of me, the part that had been silent too long, refused to give him that freedom. He had counted on my silence for too many years, confident that I'd look the other way, trust blindly, never question. Tonight would be different. Tonight he would feel me breathing down his neck, even if he never turned around. I took a slow sip of soda, the ice clinking in the paper cup. He didn't flinch. She leaned in, whispering something, and he chuckled low in his throat. My grip tightened. "Excuse me?" a teenager muttered, squeezing past me to his seat. I shifted my knees sideways, murmured an apology. When I looked back, Richard was brushing a stray hair from the woman's shoulder. My vision blurred hot for a moment, but I blinked it back. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to witness. To prepare. The previews started washing the theater in blue and gold. She laughed at the animated short, her hand grazing Richard's arm. My chest clenched. I opened my popcorn tub, an oversized one, buttery and steaming. The smell rose thick and sharp, mingling with the perfume in the air. I pinched a kernel, slid it between my teeth, and bit down hard. The crack echoed in my own ears like thunder. Neither of them turned. I chewed slowly, deliberately, my jaw flexing with each grind. Another kernel, another crunch. The salt stung my tongue, but I didn't stop. My movements were calm, steady, calculated. If I couldn't confront them yet, I would haunt them with the sound. I imagined Richard stiffening, trying to ignore it, pretending it was nothing. I imagined the woman frowning, her evening soured by a stranger's lack of manners. The thought steadied me. It gave me a sliver of control in a situation that had robbed me of so much. But sitting there also brought back memories I hadn't expected. The first movie Richard and I saw together had been a summer blockbuster 20 years ago. We'd sat in the back row, nervous and shy, our fingers brushing in the shared popcorn tub, until he finally laced his hand through mine. I remembered how electric that touch had felt, how I'd gone home that night, knowing my life had just changed. Now, sitting behind him with a bucket of popcorn, I realized how much had changed again, only this time without romance or electricity. Just silence. Just betrayal. I popped another handful of kernels into my mouth and let the crunch ring out. The movie began. A sweeping shot, dramatic music, the kind of film Richard used to roll his eyes at, but would now endure for her sake. I studied them both, noting every shift in posture, every whisper, every small gesture that confirmed what my heart had feared for months. When she leaned her head onto his shoulder, my throat tightened, but I didn't look away. If anything, I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, watching them with the sharp focus of a hunter. I thought of the ticket stub tucked away in my drawer at home, of the lies about the gym, of the countless "don't wait up" evenings. And for the first time, I felt something beyond anger, a strange, clear calm. Because now I had more than suspicion, I had truth. As the movie played, my mind raced ahead. What would I do when the lights came up? Would I stand and call his name? Would I tap his shoulder? Greet him as if bumping into an old acquaintance? Would I simply crunch another bite of popcorn and smile? So many choices swirled, but one thing was certain tonight: Richard would not leave that theater believing he had fooled me. Tonight he would know I had seen him, heard him, sat just inches away while he played the role of devoted date to another woman. The thought steadied my hands. I dipped into the popcorn again, each bite a promise to myself. The mistress shifted, glancing back once in irritation, her brows furrowed. Our eyes met briefly in the dim light. She turned away quickly, but not before I caught the flicker of unease. She didn't know me, not yet, but she would. Richard leaned closer to whisper something to her. I straightened, took a deliberate sip of soda, and let the straw squeak loudly as it reached the bottom of the cup. His shoulders twitched almost imperceptibly. Yes, I thought, you hear me. I sat back, heart steadying, as the movie flickered on. The night was only beginning, and I was no longer afraid of what came next. The opening credits rolled across the screen in glowing white letters. Around me, the audience quieted, leaning into the story. But my story wasn't on the screen. It was sitting right in front of me, with Richard's arms stretched along the back of another woman's seat, like he owned her laughter, her smile, her youth. I slid my hand into the tub of popcorn, grabbed a fistful, and popped it into my mouth. The crunch echoed in my skull, loud and sharp. I chewed slowly, deliberately, each bite grinding down the anger bubbling in my chest. The woman younger polished her hair, catching the screen's glow, giggled at something Richard whispered. She tilted her head toward him, earrings glimmering. My jaw clenched. I shoved another handful of popcorn into my mouth, chewing louder this time. Her head jerked slightly, a faint pause in her laughter. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes narrowing into the dark. She couldn't see me clearly, just a shadow with a bucket of popcorn, but the irritation was obvious. Richard shifted in his seat, stiffening just enough for me to notice. Good, I thought. Let the movie be ruined. I timed my chewing with their movements. Every time she leaned closer, I crunched. Every time he whispered into her ear, I rustled the bag. When his hand brushed against hers, I let out an exaggerated slurp from my soda straw, the kind that squeaks when the cup is nearly empty. The woman flinched, frowning into the darkness. Richard didn't turn around, but his shoulders lifted, slightly tense. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch. "It's nothing," Richard muttered too quickly. "Just ignore it." My lips curved into a thin smile. Ignore me. He'd spent months ignoring me, brushing aside my suspicions, lying with that smooth voice, but here in the dark he couldn't escape the sound of my presence. The movie played on, a dramatic scene unfolding on screen, lovers running through the rain, their laughter echoing. The audience chuckled softly. In front of me, Richard leaned forward, his hand brushing popcorn from the woman's lap. She laughed quietly, leaning closer. I shoved another handful of kernels into my mouth, chewing with all the force I could muster. The crunch tore through the silence. People a few seats down shifted, annoyed. Someone cleared their throat. But I didn't care. Richard's back stiffened again. He adjusted in his seat, his arm retreating slightly. The woman whispered something, her tone sharp, questioning. I leaned forward just enough for my voice to carry soft but firm. "Popcorn's good tonight." Richard froze. His head turned a fraction, as if he couldn't stop himself. Our eyes met briefly in the glow of the screen, his wide and startled, mine calm and unflinching. He whipped his head forward, panic flashing across his shoulders. The woman followed his gaze, catching only the outline of my face before I leaned back into the shadows. My heart thundered, but my expression stayed neutral. I reached into the tub again, letting the kernels rustle loudly, and took another deliberate bite. The tension at their row was palpable now. She fidgeted, shifting in her seat. Richard sat rigid, his fingers gripping his knees. "Richard, what is going on?" she hissed under her breath. "Nothing," he said, voice taut. "Just watch the movie." I nearly laughed. Watch the movie? As if either of them could focus with me breathing down their necks. The scene on screen shifted, a quiet, romantic moment, violins swelling. The audience leaned in, absorbed. And right then, I crunched down on a massive bite, the sound sharp and intrusive. A man in the back chuckled, mistaking it for bad manners. But Richard knew. He knew it wasn't just popcorn. It was me. The mistress glanced back again, her eyes adjusting. This time, recognition flickered. Her face paled, lips parting as she turned quickly back to Richard. "Who is that?" she whispered urgently. Richard's hand went to his mouth, rubbing his jaw, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. He didn't answer. I let the silence stretch for a moment, then took another loud slurp from my soda, the straw rattling against the ice. The sound echoed like nails against glass. Richard shifted again, a bead of sweat glistening at his temple. The woman pulled her hand from his, crossing her arms. She didn't laugh anymore. And me, I leaned back, steadying my breath. My heart was pounding, yes, but there was a strange calm too. A satisfaction in knowing he was cornered, unable to pretend, unable to escape the truth, pressing in from behind. Every crunch of popcorn was a statement. I see you. I hear you. I know everything. The movie blurred before my eyes. I couldn't tell you what plot was unfolding, what dialogue was spoken. My entire focus was on the two people sitting inches away, unraveling with each passing minute. Richard kept shifting, wiping his palms against his slacks. The woman whispered again, her tone sharp, but he shook his head quickly, refusing to turn around. I smiled in the dark. This was only the beginning. Halfway through the film, I reached into the nearly empty tub, scooping the crumbs and broken kernels from the bottom. The sound of my hand scraping the cardboard echoed in the silence. I shoved the remnants into my mouth, chewing furiously, letting the rough edges scrape my tongue. Richard flinched visibly. The woman leaned away from him, arms folded tight. I leaned forward again, my breath warm against the back of his neck. "Enjoying the show," I whispered. His entire body went rigid. He turned his head just enough to see me fully this time. Our eyes locked, his wide with panic, mine steady with cold clarity. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was the loudest confession he'd ever given me. I leaned back, wiped my buttery fingers on a napkin, and popped the last kernel into my mouth. The crunch was deafening in the quiet theater. And with that, the war was won. The film flickered on, but in my row, the real drama had already overtaken the screen. Richard sat frozen, shoulders stiff, his laughter gone, his posture rigid. The woman beside him, his mistress I no longer needed to pretend otherwise, kept glancing over her shoulder, her face pale in the glow. I leaned back in my seat, the empty popcorn tub resting on my lap. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm, almost serene. For years, Richard had controlled the story, the faithful husband, the hard-working advisor, the man too busy for date nights. Now, I was rewriting the script one whispered line at a time. On screen, two characters exchanged vows in a candlelit scene. Around us, the audience sighed softly. But my attention was fixed entirely on Richard's hand, twitching against his knee, his wedding ring catching the faint light. That band of gold had once symbolized everything. Now it glared back at me like a mockery. The mistress leaned in toward him, her whisper sharp enough for me to catch. "Who is she?" Richard shook his head quickly, too afraid to glance back again. "No one. Just watch the movie." No one. I nearly laughed aloud at the irony. For 2 decades I had been his wife, his partner, the mother of his life's routines. Now I was reduced to no one until I chose to remind him otherwise. I leaned forward close enough for my breath to brush his ear. "Careful, Richard. She might not like sequels." He jolted, nearly spilling the soda in his hand. The mistress turned eyes wide, and for the first time recognition dawned. She mouthed my name, though we had never spoken before, and her face drained of color. I sat back, folding my arms. My voice had been quiet, but the message had landed. The rest of the movie blurred around us. I couldn't follow the plot, couldn't hear the dialogue. All I heard was the thundering silence of the two people in front of me, their once playful whispers replaced with stiff stillness. Richard didn't touch her again. She kept her arms across her body, angled away from him. I savored every second, not because it erased the betrayal nothing ever could, but because it stripped away the illusion. For months they had lived in shadows hidden behind lies, and now, in the dark theater, the truth was sitting between them, louder than the surround sound. When the credits began to roll, the audience stirred, stretching, murmuring about the ending. I stayed seated, waiting. Richard remained frozen, as if standing would expose him further. The mistress pulled her purse onto her lap, fumbling with the strap, desperate to leave. Finally, Richard rose. He turned halfway, his eyes flicking toward me in the dim light. Our gazes locked, his filled with panic, mine with something colder. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence was heavy enough to crush him. We moved toward the exit, with the crowd, the shuffle of feet, and the crinkle of candy wrappers filling the air. I stayed a step behind them, watching the way Richard's shoulders hunched, his head bowed. He had always walked tall, exuding confidence, commanding rooms. Now he looked like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Outside in the lobby, the bright lights made everything too real. She tugged at his arm, her voice low but fierce. "You didn't tell me she'd be here." Richard's jaw clenched. "I didn't know." I stepped past them, then brushing close enough that my shoulder grazed his. He flinched, as though burned. I didn't stop walking until I reached the exit, pushing the glass door open into the cool night air. The breeze hit my face, sharp and bracing. I drew in a long breath. Behind me, I heard hurried footsteps. Elaine, Richard's voice cracked. I turned slowly. He stood a few feet away, his mistress lingering near the lobby doors, uncertain whether to follow. His face was pale, eyes darting, hands twisting nervously at his sides. "Don't," I said, my voice steady. "Not here." He swallowed hard, words dying on his tongue. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. No slick excuses, no quick lies. Just silence. I let that silence hang between us. then turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. Each step was deliberate, final. He didn't chase me. Driving home, my hands trembled against the steering wheel, but not from fear. From release. The confrontation hadn't been loud or messy, but it had been enough. Richard had seen me, the mistress had seen me, and the charade was shattered. The house loomed in the distance, dark against the night sky. As I pulled into the driveway, I thought about the years I had spent protecting that home, guarding its secrets, convincing myself the cracks were just shadows. Tonight, those shadows were gone. Inside, I set my keys on the counter, slipped off my shoes, and stood in the stillness. The quiet was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. I knew the hardest part was yet to come, the words, the choices, the unraveling of 19 years. But for now, I allowed myself one small victory. I had looked betrayal in the face and refused to shrink. And Richard knew it. The house was silent when I walked in, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound louder than it should. I set my purse down on the entryway table, my hands still trembling from the theater. I half expected Richard to burst through the door behind me, desperate to explain. But he didn't. He stayed behind, probably tangled in whispered arguments with the woman who now knew exactly who I was. I slipped off my coat and hung it neatly by the door, every gesture deliberate. Control. That was what I had gained tonight, and I wasn't about to surrender it by collapsing into tears. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner from the afternoon I'd spent scrubbing counters. The coffee mug I'd left in the sink still had a ring of dark residue. Everything looked normal, ordinary, and yet nothing felt normal anymore. Richard came home late, close to midnight. I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway, the soft slam of the car door, and then the hesitant creak of the front door opening. His footsteps were heavier than usual, dragging. "Elaine," he called softly into the darkness. I stayed seated at the dining room table, a single lamp glowing at my side. I didn't answer. Let him walk into the silence. Let him feel the weight of it. When he entered the room, his face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He dropped his keys into the bowl with a clatter. "We need to talk," he said. I raised my gaze to him, slowly, steady. "Do we?" He flinched. "Please. I know what it looked like, but—" "Stop!" My voice was sharp enough to slice the air. "Don't insult me with excuses." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His hands twisted nervously in front of him, the way they always did when he was cornered. "It wasn't serious," he said finally, the words thin and pathetic. "I was lonely. It was just the movies." I laughed, a bitter sound that startled even me. "Just the movies. Don't lie to me, Richard. Not now. Not when I've got the ticket stubs, the late nights, the perfume that clings to your shirts. Not when I sat behind you tonight and watched you hold another woman like she was yours." His eyes widened, panic flashing. "You've been keeping track." "Yes," I said, leaning forward, my voice cold and deliberate. "Because while you were busy building your second life, I was busy writing down every little crack in the one we had left." He sank into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. "Elaine, I don't know why I did it. I've been stressed, Don't," I cut in, my voice shaking now, not from fear, but from fury. "Don't turn this into a midlife crisis sob story. You chose this. Every late-night text, every ticket bought, every lie you told when you kissed me goodbye. Those weren't accidents, Richard. They were choices. Deliberate ones." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I would not give him the satisfaction of watching me break. He looked up, his face crumpled. "I can change. I'll end it. I'll cut her off, I swear. Just don't let this be the end of us." I shook my head slowly. "You don't get to decide that anymore." The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. For years, I had been the one to patch things, to smooth edges, to forgive, before apologies were even spoken. But not tonight. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I whispered finally. "Not that you touched her, or that you lied. It's that you took the small things. The Friday night movies we used to love, the popcorn fights, the late night drives home. You gave her the rituals that were ours, and you thought I'd never notice. His eyes filled with tears. Elaine, please. No. My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. You don't get to beg now. You don't get to weep when you laughed with her. You destroyed this long before I walked into that theater tonight. We sat like that for what felt like hours, the lamp casting harsh shadows across his face. He kept whispering apologies, promises, desperate bargains. I let them wash over me like static. They meant nothing now. At some point, he reached for my hand across the table. I pulled it back before his fingers could touch mine. His face crumpled further, but I held steady. You're going to leave, I said finally, my voice flat. Pack your things. By Monday, I don't want to see you here. His head snapped up, panic etched in every line. Elaine, please, this is our home. No, I interrupted. It was our home. You made it a stage for lies, and I refuse to keep living inside your fiction. He stayed on the couch that night, but I didn't sleep either. I lay awake in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sobs drifting down the hall. For once, I felt nothing but emptiness. Not pity, not anger. Just the hollow relief of truth, finally laid bare. In the morning, sunlight streamed across the kitchen floor as I made coffee. Richard stood in the doorway, rumpled and weary. His lips parted like he wanted to try again, but the look on my face stopped him. Don't, I said simply. No more words. He nodded, slowly defeated. The following days blurred together. He moved his clothes out in small trips, avoiding my gaze. Neighbors whispered, colleagues called, his life slowly unraveling outside the walls of our house. I let it happen. For once, his reputation wasn't my burden to protect. At night, I sat with my journal, writing down each thought, each memory. It was the only way I could make sense of it all, 19 years condensed into pages of joy, grief, and betrayal. And through it all, one truth pulsed steady in my chest. I had seen him in that theater. I had watched him squirm under the weight of my silence, and no matter how many apologies he strung together, he could never erase the sound of my crunching popcorn or the knowledge that I was done being blind. Spring arrived early that year, the first buds pushing stubbornly through the soil in my garden. I remember kneeling in the dirt one Saturday morning, gloves pulled tight, when it struck me how long it had been since I'd felt the sun on my back, without a weight pressing down on my chest. The house was quieter now, emptier too, but it was mine. Mine to clean, to rearrange, to breathe inside without feeling like a stranger. Richard had moved out weeks earlier. At first, he lingered, calls, texts, long emails filled with apologies that blurred into each other like recycled lines from an old play. I didn't respond. The silence between us became its own language, one I understood better than his hollow promises. The divorce papers came soon after, and with them a kind of strange peace. The woman, his mistress, was gone as well. A mutual acquaintance told me she left town abruptly, her job and her reputation in tatters. Richard was left with nothing but the echoes of his choices. I thought the grief would crush me. I thought I'd wake up every morning drowning in anger or regret. But instead, something else bloomed: clarity. I signed up for a photography class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do, but had put off for years. I filled the house with plants, cluttering the windowsills with green life. I invited old friends over for coffee, laughed until my stomach hurt, realized how long it had been since I'd laughed without restraint. And slowly, day by day, I started to recognize myself again. Of course there were hard nights. Nights when I'd lie awake hearing echoes of Richard's laughter in the theater, remembering the look on his face when he realized I was sitting right behind him. My stomach would knot, my breath would catch, and I'd wonder how 2 decades could dissolve into silence and lies. But then I'd remind myself betrayal had ended my marriage, yes, but it hadn't ended me. One evening while walking home from the photography class, I bumped into a colleague from school. We grabbed coffee, talked about books, and travel, nothing more. But I realized in that moment that companionship didn't have to feel like walking on eggshells. It could feel light, simple, even joyful. I wasn't rushing into anything new, but I wasn't afraid anymore either. Months passed. The seasons turned. Richard tried one last time to reach me standing outside the school parking lot as I walked to my car. He looked thinner, older, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Elaine," he said softly, "I just want you to know I'm sorry. For everything." I studied him for a long moment. The anger that had once burned hot in my chest was gone, now replaced by something calmer. "I know you are," I said quietly, "but sorry doesn't rebuild what you chose to destroy." His lips trembled, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and walked away. And for the first time, I didn't feel small in his absence. I felt strong. A year later, I found myself in another movie theater. This time with friends from work, a comedy we'd been eager to see. I sat in the middle row, popcorn in hand. When the lights dimmed and laughter rippled through the crowd, I realized I wasn't bracing for betrayal anymore. I was just present. The salty kernels crunched between my teeth, and instead of bitterness, I felt warmth. Popcorn wasn't a weapon anymore. It was just popcorn. And I was free. I often think back to that night, the night I sat behind Richard and his mistress, crunching every bite like it was a declaration. People ask me if I regret it, if maybe I should have confronted him, directly made a scene, demanded answers. But no, that night wasn't about answers. It was about reclaiming myself in the quietest, loudest way possible. Because sometimes revenge isn't shouting or breaking things. Sometimes it's sitting in the dark, crunching popcorn until the truth can't be ignored, and then walking out with your dignity intact. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who isn't afraid of silence, who isn't afraid of endings, because she knows endings can also be beginnings. So I'll ask you, what would you have done if you were in that theater sitting behind the man who betrayed you? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have crunched the popcorn until he couldn't pretend anymore? Share your thoughts with me, and if my story resonates with you, follow along for more. Sometimes the most ordinary moments, a movie ticket, a bucket of popcorn, can hold the most powerful lessons about dignity, betrayal, and starting over. Because betrayal may have broken my marriage, but it didn't break me.